this is what's not working. It's going to work.
See it all side by side.
You know what? I think I can just stand up and everybody should be able to hear me.
Side by side.
Okay. Hi, everyone. And I just want to make sure people can hear me virtually. I'm going to step over here. Somebody, Christopher Sinclair, you're nodding. Thank you. And I'm glad you can hear me too. We've got people still trickling in here to the meeting. I know we've got this, like we've got this on a fisheye, but it's called Owl. And it looks like we're in a closet. We're not. We're in a pretty big room. And like I said, we've got a few people trickling in, and I know we've probably got potentially twice as many people joining us virtually. So we have like to welcome everyone here, and we have a few minutes right at the beginning as people are starting to come in. And traditionally, you know, we go around the room and introduce ourselves, but virtually it might be a little tricky, and I don't want to take a whole lot of time, so we can just jump right into the meeting. But I would like to recognize those that are here. So if you don't mind, we're going to test the system. And we're going to start here. You just introduce yourselves and say who you're with. And if there's anything of noteworthy, or if you have any questions, something that you are hoping will maybe get brought up in this meeting, now might be a good time to say, I'd like to find out about this, or I'm looking forward to hearing about this. And since, oh, and we have a sign up sheet here. Those of you virtually, if you would, I know this might be crazy because there's a lot of you, but if you'll put in the chat your name and who you're with, that would be great.
Okay, my name is Jim Sturza. I am with Millennium here in Salt Lake, and just here to learn.
And
It's my first
Millennium
meeting.
is
We're a distributor.
a distributor.
Yes.
Okay, it's nice to have you.
Yeah. Thank you.
My name is Kira Slauson. I represent the Utah Rural Telecom Association, and I'm always excited to talk about rural telecom, but I'm presenting, so I'll save it for then.
Eddie Shelley, Irby Distribution.
Great, glad to have you. Are you local as well?
Salt Lake here.
Salt Lake.
Jack Walkenhurst with All West Communications. We're located in Camas.
Nice to have you, Jack.
Brad Clausen, I'm with Rural Development, and I'll be talking about the Reconnect program today.
Jake Simon with Utah Broadband. We're located in Draper.
Brooke Allen, I'm with Direct Communications and Direct Communications Eagle Mountain.
Okay, so you're located here locally yourself?
I'm based out of our corporate office in Idaho.
Okay, well, it's nice to have you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Keith Heaton. I'm with the State Department of Workforce Services, Director of Community Development, particularly interested in rural broadband.
And my name is Matt McCullough. I'm with the Utah Education and Telehealth Network, primarily responsible for telehealth services and operations.
Good morning. I'm Glenn Reichert with US Ignite. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. We're very interested in getting people connected to the internet. We're running a pilot program right now in 7 communities across the country with support from the National Science Foundation and Schmidt Futures. And anything we can do in Utah, we'd love to help with. So I'm here to scout out opportunities in Utah.
Great.
I'm Jeff Young. I'm multi-representing. I've got multiple communities that wanted me to come down that are putting in, as well as a private company Wi-Fi up at Cache Valley that is putting in. So I'm here for information.
Well, we hope, and I think we have a lot of information today. I think it'll be all good.
Hi, I'm Kayla Maris. I'm with Mill Creek City with the Promise Program.
I am Kim McKinley from Utopia Fiber, and my one statement is I was very pleased with the FCC nominations yesterday. So
okay,
that's what I'm talking about.
I'm Roger Timmerman, also with Utopia Fiber.
I'm Liz Gavis. I'm with the State Library Division.
I'm Joe Silverswag. I'm with Comcast.
I see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new faces. So I guess the word is getting out. I'm glad to have you here. You sneaked in the back, Eric. You have to introduce yourself.
Eric Isps with MIB Partners.
Great. Glad to have everyone here. Our first presenter is actually virtual. And so we have Christopher Sinclair. Christopher, we're gonna have you unmute and see you and present them all. Let's hear your voice and see if you're coming out loud.
Good
and
morning,
clear.
Rebecca.
Yay. So Christopher Sinclair is with Cable Runner. It's a fiber installation technology via wastewater systems, or I know there's more to it than that, but that's what fit on the agenda. So Chris, we'll turn the time over to you.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I think we can all agree that the need for reliable and robust fiber infrastructure and access to broadband connectivity for all use cases and all aspects of our society and economy has never been greater, nor has the urgency to implement it. Cable Runner has pioneered a method to deploy critical fiber facilities faster, more economically, and less disruptively than the traditional methods of fiber construction in the public right-of-way to further enable current and emerging technologies. And we do that by leveraging an existing infrastructural asset, essentially the public stormwater system. We can also install in wastewater, utility tunnels, transportation tunnels, and so forth, really the same form factor. But we found that jurisdictions are more willing to consider availing access to the stormwater system for this type of installation. Jurisdictions are also able to monetize an existing public asset for another public benefit. This technology was actually born out of necessity back in 1996 by the sewer department of the city of Vienna, Austria. They operate a combined stormwater wastewater system. That fiber network currently serves over 140,000 customers throughout the city of Vienna, and they haven't suffered a fiber cut in over 15 years. The Cable Runner technology has been licensed and deployed in numerous countries around the world, and we have over 1,500 linear miles of our facilities currently installed. The essence of our technology is a modular cable tray. This is the smaller of the two. This would measure approximately 1 1/8 inches by 2 11/16. This would be installed in to the pipe wall by a robotic apparatus in pipes between, say, 8 and 36 inches in diameter. You can see the micro air tubes here, and again on end. Again, this is the smaller of the two, and this is designed to be installed robotically. In pipes larger than 36 inches, the modular cable tray would be installed manually, and it's likewise slightly larger. In this case, it measures 1.5 inches by 3 3/8. You can see a plastic PVC clip here, which would be attached to the pipe wall with a stainless steel screw anchor, likewise a stainless steel omega bracket. Again, the microduct on end. We estimate that either cable tray can accommodate up to 1,728 strands of fiber. We do consider ourselves as more of a middle mile open access solution and an important part of the deployment mix, complementary to the more traditional methods of fiber construction in the public right-of-way, whether directional bore, open cut trench, or aerial attachment. To the extent that the existing infrastructure is available, suitable, and permissible. There are two different scenarios to present. The first would be that Cable Runner would enter into an access agreement with a jurisdiction whereby we would provide competitive dark fiber services to our customers. We do not provide lit, and we do not provide managed services. So we essentially remove that element of competition from our own customers. Our customers are primarily the wireless carriers, the fiber companies, and the third-party service infrastructure providers who are rapidly expanding their networks and looking to achieve both a lower capital construction, essentially a lower CapEx, as well as a greater speed to market. Both of those are hallmarks of the Cable Runner system. I'm sure that you're well aware that one of the greatest challenges and impediments to fiber deployment is simply the high capital construction cost, which Cable Runner has solved. It just comes down to ROI, and unfortunately, that's why some areas remain either unserved or underserved by fiber and broadband services. The other option, in addition to Cable Runner providing dark fiber, competitive dark fiber solutions, is to provide a licensing option to a jurisdiction, whereby the jurisdiction would license the Cable Runner technology. We would work very closely with the jurisdiction in terms of the design, engineering, and construction of the fiber plant. But in the end, the jurisdiction would own, operate, and maintain the fiber facilities for their own use. And we've experienced a fairly appreciable increase in the demand for the licensing option. And so we're certainly happy to be able to cater to that need in the marketplace. We recently worked very closely and collaboratively with the city of Dallas, Texas on a pilot project. The network objective there was to connect Dallas City Hall, which, as you may know, is on the south side of the Central Business District, with an interdepartmental service facility approximately 2 miles away. We worked closely with public works staff, water utilities, and other departments to identify and qualify the route through the existing stormwater infrastructure. End to end, approximately 2 miles of dark fiber, and we were able to construct that dark fiber network in just 8 days. So that reflects a fraction of the time at a fraction of the expense, again, as compared with the more traditional or common methods of fiber construction in the public right-of-way. As part of the network objective, we did terminate at designated traffic signal poles along the fiber path in support of the city's intelligent transportation system platform. The city is still analyzing that data, and we look forward to being able to expand our network and our competitive dark fiber services in the city of Dallas very soon. We're open to similar pilot projects, public-private partnerships, and so forth. We've launched almost concurrently with the onset of the pandemic a rather aggressive jurisdictional campaign reaching out to jurisdictions that we feel would be most amenable to this type of offer. We continually poll our carrier customers to identify those localities, large and small, where they would expect our dark fiber services to be. And we reach out to jurisdictions to ascertain the acquisition process, the approval process, and so forth, and enter into formal entitlements in order to be able to access the public infrastructure. I just wanted to give you just a brief overview on Cable Runner, our origins in the sewer department of the city of Vienna, Austria, our expansion and deployment in numerous countries around the world, our introduction here in the United States. We certainly look forward to working with the jurisdictions and the state of Utah in order to be able to offer our competitive dark fiber services and or the licensing option for the Cable Runner technology. Our informational materials have been provided to Rebecca and her team, which I believe will be posted. That does contain my contact information and our website. And I just look forward to corresponding with any of you directly to discuss the Cable Runner technology and associated public benefits in greater detail. And I really appreciate your time today. Thank you, Rebecca.
You bet. Thank you. Is there any questions? I'm sorry, I didn't give you a very good introduction. I should have let you know that this is a new installation type technology. And we're always open to having any of you present and you have anything that you would like to share or tell us about your company. Christopher, you're located, I know you're not here in Utah, but so if anybody has any burning questions right now they'd like to ask him before you have to wait till we get everything posted. Okay.
Christopher, it's really interesting technology. So I'm Joe Silverswag. I'm with Comcast. I'm just curious that using riding on the existing sewer infrastructure, does that limit you to more urban environments in terms of what you're able to connect? Because it feels to me like it would be hard to leverage this technology across some of the challenging rural gaps that we have geographically.
Yes. Yeah, and that's a great question. Thank you. Yes, to the extent that the existing stormwater or wastewater infrastructure is available, obviously that would be more commonly found in the urban and suburban environments. I realize that there's a justifiable interest in deploying in rural communities, often that do not have underground infrastructure such as stormwater. So there are open canals and other types in which we can install our facilities. But you are correct. This application is better suited for the urban and suburban environments.
Hi, Glenn Reichert from US Ignite. What kinds of breakage do you find happening? You're within a pipe that's got lots of other things going on at that time. And what have you seen in the way of failures?
Yes. And we really don't. And I think the primary reason for that is that we install in the apex or the crown section of the pipe, ideally above the common capacity flow line. We also worked very collaboratively with the public works staff to identify the newer, larger infrastructure. We certainly want to avoid those areas where a capital improvement project may be planned, where the stormwater infrastructure may not be of proper condition or capacity, in order to be able to identify that route which best serves the community and leveraging the larger, newer infrastructure. But in terms of failure and obstruction and so forth, we really don't. And I think that the primary reason there is for taking the prudent steps in the design and engineering stage to avoid some of those common challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question.
Hi, Jake Simon from Utah Broadband. What percentage would you say of a major project would end up using the cable runner technology? Say if it was a major project that was using you as middle mile, what percentage would be for that interconnect?
Yeah, and thank you for that. We're not looking to deploy fiber where it's not needed. So to the extent that the facilities-based providers are looking to expand their networks, to upgrade route hardening, route diversity, and so forth, and the underlying stormwater infrastructure can support it, we think that it's a logical choice. Does that answer your question?
I was just looking for kind of a general idea. If you were planning out that major project, say like 20% of it would be using those storm sewer systems before it connects to something external.
Yeah. I'm not sure that I could quantify that. A lot of it has to do with the build plan, the network objective, the existence of current fiber facilities, and the extent to which we can support a facilities-based provider to expand or enhance their network.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
Tom Hansen from Washington Terrace. Question for you.
Yes.
In the information that we'll be receiving, do you guys have some videos and details of how you use the storm drain systems and where they're connected, how they're connected, and all those details of how that looks?
Yes. So there's an overview presentation as well as a document that's entitled Commonly Asked Questions, which really focuses on more of the technical and operational aspects of the cable runner technology and installation. Our website does offer some very insightful videos of installations. And if to the extent that you need any additional information, I'd certainly be happy to provide that.
Great.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, either here in the room or not? Okay, well, thank you very much, Christopher, taking the time to come to our meeting. You're welcome to stay. We have a great group of people here and very diverse. It's interesting to see, we've got providers here, obviously supply chain and government. We have just a variety of people that are participating here today. And I know you all came.
Thank you, Rebecca.
You bet. The annual UDOT report. And I'm sorry to disappoint you. So if any of you want to leave now, Lynn is really sick. And
Aw.
she's just our favorite person, and I know it can't be COVID because she's already had it. She is so sick that she just could not come today, so we'll have her present hopefully in January. So put that on your calendars, UDOT annual update, January 12th.
I move a get well soon for Lynn.
All right, here. Let's have a second for that one. So we will now jump to Matt McCullough. He's the Director of Telehealth Services, Principal Investigator, NRTRC. You'll have to explain that acronym to us. School-based telehealth program and broadband support for healthcare, Utah Telehealth Network. I'm going to be running your presentation here, so
Let me come up there.
yeah, and I'm gonna also flip we've got this owl, so it kind of shows the whole room, but I'm thinking that if I flip this, then people that are here virtually can also see you, and maybe you'll tell us a little bit about the award Provo. Did it just recently, a telehealth? Are you aware of that?
About what?
I won't put you on the spot.
That's okay. That's fine. Maybe we can talk about it.
So
when we
let
get
me,
to
do you
questions.
want that up? Do you want us to see you, or do you want your slide?
You can just have it be on me for a few minutes and then we'll pull up the slides. So again, great to be here, everyone. Matt McCullough with Utah Education and Telehealth Network. If you knew Deb Marsh in the past, I replaced Deb in February of 2020. So I used to work for the Utah Department of Health in the State Office of Rural Health and understood and worked a lot on the importance of telehealth. And so in February, I decided to take the job at Uetn, thinking that telehealth would become more important in the future. And in March, that became very apparent that telehealth was part of the future of healthcare. So it's been quite a ride. So I am the Director of Telehealth Services for Uetn, and I'll explain a little bit more about who Uetn is. I'm also the Principal Investigator for the NRTRC. That acronym stands for the Northwest Regional Telehealth Resource Center. It's a federally funded resource center that provides education and training and technical assistance for healthcare providers, patients, organizations in a 7-state region from Utah all the way to Alaska. It's a HRSA funded grant program. So I always talk about the NRTRC because we have a really great website and tons of resources for telehealth. If you are in need of learning telehealth basics or learning about the ins and outs of getting reimbursed and doing telehealth. Maybe raise your hand if you're familiar with Uetn. Uetn does. Okay, most of you are. I assume this group would be.
But not everyone.
But not everyone. Okay, so I'll give a little overview. So Uetn is based out of the University of Utah. We're a state-funded organization, and our motto essentially is we connect and we network for education and healthcare in Utah. So we leverage heavily the FCC E-rate and rural healthcare programs. We connect to every school and library, also systems of higher education in Utah, about 1,700 locations. And we're a public-private partnership, so we work closely with all of the telecommunication service providers to help expand this broadband network all over the whole state of Utah. Maybe you could bring up now my first slide. I just want to show the network map for Uetn and just really stress for me what's so unique. I give presentations all the time about telehealth, but also who Uetn is. And to be able to say that we have this resource, this statewide network that connects to 1,700 locations, really creates some incredible opportunities. And one of those opportunities I want to talk about today is the school-based telehealth program that I've started to really bridge the gap between education and healthcare, work with the State Board of Education on safe and healthy schools and some of the programs that they have. On this map, you can see the physical broadband network connecting to all the schools. If you can see the white circles on the map, those represent the 83 healthcare sites that we serve. And they're primarily rural hospitals, small critical access hospitals, clinics, public health departments, and then we have a number of other sites like University of Utah dialysis centers that we support all throughout the state. And we primarily use the FCC Healthcare Connect Fund program. It pays a flat 65% reimbursement directly to telecommunication providers. So right now, one of the reasons I wanted to share this is we're about ready to renew all of the circuits and contracts. We have an RFP that we're preparing in the next few months to go out. We signed 5-year contracts to provide the broadband to all of these healthcare facilities. And those contracts all end in June 2022. So we're preparing right now to rebid basically all of the circuits for the healthcare sites. And so I get asked a lot of questions about broadband for rural healthcare in Utah. Is it adequate? Are they able to do telehealth? Are patients able to do telehealth in the home? And some of the things that we've been noticing is broadband needs are increasing exponentially in these rural hospitals and clinics. And part of what's driving that is most hospitals and clinics are moving to cloud-based EHRs, electronic health record systems. They're also moving to cloud-based telemedicine platforms to do their virtual visits. In addition, because of the COVID pandemic, there has been a lot of home-based care, remote patient monitoring, really utilizing infrastructure, being able to send patients home with telehealth kits to monitor blood pressure, oxygen level, and have that data be reported back to providers directly. That's what we call remote patient monitoring. It's a form of telehealth service. So those three things in particular, you can see are all utilizing bandwidth. And so as part of this, this RFP and rebidding the circuits for the healthcare sites, we're really looking closely at the broadband needs that all these locations have and making sure they have adequate speeds. In addition, a lot of the rural hospitals are asking for redundant circuits. You know, if your electronic health record system and your telehealth system are all cloud-based and you lose that connection, it's a bad day and a very long, hard day for the IT staff at those hospitals. So we're doing all that we can to bring in redundant circuits, you know, trying to utilize as many service providers as we can to keep them up. So I think that's really my update about the healthcare sites and the telehealth services we provide, renewing all the circuits. I want to talk for just a few minutes about this really exciting school-based telehealth program that we've started. Maybe Rebecca can go to the next slide. Just one slide here. So since I started at Uetn, I really was interested in school-based telehealth. It's being utilized all over the country in different forms because every state figures out what works for them. So we received CARES Act funding last year, and we purchased 170 of these small telehealth kits. We have placed them in 170 schools in 20 school districts. You can see on the map where I have a star, all the different school districts that received these telehealth kits. Not every school got one. We had to prioritize. So we started with Title I schools where we knew there were specific needs. And essentially the way it works, we're starting out simple by using telehealth to connect students to their school nurse. And the reason that's really important in rural areas is not every school has a school nurse. In a lot of the districts, you have 1 or 2 nurses for 10 schools. So a nurse can't be there all day in the school. So the idea is, and my image down here about the workflow, the student would go down to the office and the secretary would help them go into the nurse's office and get on a tablet and start a telehealth visit with the school nurse who's remote, who's at another school, who's not able to get there. And they can do that telehealth visit. The student can talk to the nurse. There's also a number of diagnostic tools that are linked to the tablet via Bluetooth. There's a pulse oximeter, a stethoscope, a blood pressure cuff, and a high definition otoscope camera if they needed to take a picture of an eardrum, and some other cameras. And our goal is to expand it eventually so that school districts and nurses can work with local healthcare providers. And primarily, we are interested in mental and behavioral health providers. And that's probably the greatest request we've had from school nurses is there's a critical need for pediatric behavioral health providers, especially in rural communities. And so with the technology, they can essentially be able to do a telehealth visit with a behavioral health provider right in the school, keep the kid in school, also be able to bring in a parent, have them receive a text with a link to join that meeting, all over HIPAA compliant secure technology. So it's a very exciting program and it's growing. We've had a lot of more interest from districts who didn't get in on it in the first round. And we're trying to request ARPA funding for more equipment to be able to roll this out statewide to those schools and districts that want to participate. So what I love about it is we're utilizing this network we already have in place. We're using the broadband in the schools and really being able to bridge that gap between healthcare and education. So I think I'll stop there and open it up and see what questions there are. Yeah.
I just wondered for the nurse, are there certain services that she provides? But if it's above, her level of experience, to whom does she turn for medical advice or direction on how to treat certain situations? Or does she just tell them you need to go see your doctor?
Yeah, great question. So there are definite limitations with licensing to what a nurse can do. They can't prescribe medication, they can't diagnose. And so when it is a situation like that, where the technology is set up so that the nurse would be able to send an invite to a provider, a nurse practitioner, primary care provider, also to a parent, and have both of them join that visit and be able to coordinate the care for that student. Right now, really the status quo is send the student home. And the Utah Department of Health produces a great report on school nurses. They say in their report that I want to say it's 90–95% of students who see the school nurse are able to go back to class. So that's a great statistic. And if they can see them virtually, our hope is that we can have that same level of care and be able to keep them in school.
You're saying 95, if they don't see the nurse, they're all going home. If they do see the nurse, 95% of them get to stay in school.
Yeah. Tells you a lot about the kind of conditions that, you know. I was at a school a couple of weeks ago and I heard a story about a student who put a little googly eye in their ear. It's stuff like that they've got to go down and see the nurse, but the nurse can take care of things like that, you know. They see a lot of interesting things in schools.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
I mean, kids.
Question? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that very much. And it's really, we haven't heard a lot from the telehealth side of Uetn, so appreciate him taking the time and welcome to, yeah, the baptism by fire, right? Joining that organization. Stop sharing, and our next presenter, we have Chris Lawson. She is the director and legal counsel for the Utah Rural Telecom Association. Is that correct?
It is. Do you want me to stand up there?
You know what?
Down here?
Come right here. I think you can stand here at the podium, or you can stand in front, and you can see how well everything can be seen. We have a sign-up sheet. We're going to start this around right now. If your name is not on it, add it. Like, you want to be added, and I'm sorry, it's really small. So if you can't see it at all, because you can't see your name at all, then just put your name in the back with your contact information and we'll get you added if you want to keep getting annoying emails. They're not annoying. Okay, good.
Good morning. My name is Kira Slauson. I'm the legal counsel for the Utah Rural Telecom Association. We call ourselves URTA. URTA members are rural companies in Utah that provide originally telephone service and now telephone and broadband service in the rural areas of the state. If you were looking at the Uetn map, all the areas that weren't on the I-15 corridor are basically served by our members, and we work in partnership with Uetn to bring services to all of the schools in rural Utah. Rebecca asked me to update you on some of the exciting things that are happening in our members areas. Some of this is an update on things you may have heard before, and hopefully some of it's new, but I'll just start with Emory Telecom. Emory Telecom is located in the Emory County, Carbon County areas. They've recently expanded into Grand and San Juan counties, which is very exciting for the state of Utah because San Juan County has been habitually unserved or underserved. And so Emory Telecom has just finished using USDA Reconnect grant funds and Community Connect funds. They have finished a grant project in Counsel Valley, which is located in Grand County, right north of Moab, and then New LaSalle, which is located in northern San Juan County, just south of Moab. They have also completed phase 1 of the Uetn contract to serve the White Mesa Ute and the Navajo schools, and they've built fiber to the home in Bluff. Yes.
You have a map? You can show us of the area?
I'm sorry, I don't have a map with me, but I can get you a map. The urta.org has a good map of the rural areas, and I'm happy to provide that to Rebecca after this for the slides or for the material presentations. Emory Telecom is currently building using the Community Connect grant to Mexican Hat, waiting on the permits for Uetn phase 2, which would bring service to Monument Valley and Navajo Mountain. Navajo Mountain is probably one of the most remote areas in Utah. There's really no easy or direct way to get there, but they're bringing fiber to that area. In May, like I said, in May, the Public Service Commission approved applications for 2 of Emory's subsidiary companies, eFiber Moab and eFiber San Juan, to become certificated carriers of last resort in those areas. They will have access to the Utah Universal Service Fund. They've committed to providing carrier of last resort service to everybody in those areas. And they will be able to install fiber facilities to those locations that were not already covered by Reconnect or Community Connect grants. By leveraging the federal funding, the burden on the state fund, the State Universal Service Fund, has been greatly reduced and enabled service to be brought to those areas at a much lower cost than somebody who hadn't had those federal funds available. And I think you've heard Emory present before in this meeting. They've been working on this construction project down in San Juan County for quite some time. They're entering phase 2 soon, but they will have the tariffs filed for their e-fiber entities and will begin providing service to customers before the end of the year in some of those areas. I also am told not to steal any thunder from Lynn next meeting, but they're working on a project with UDOT to build across the San Rafael Swell along I-70 that has been historically underserved. No, I mean, if you've driven through there, you know that your cell signal dies and not to be seen again until right around Ridgefield. Telecom is another one of our members. They've just finished a fiber to the home build on Paiute Reservation in Miller County. They're building fiber to the home in Meadow, Kanash, Leamington. You may not have heard of some of those areas. I had no idea where Leamington was, and I represent rural telephone companies all day, every day. These are very rural areas. They previously not had any access to fiber facilities, so we're really excited about these Telecom projects. South Central Utah Telephone Association is also working on their full fiber to the premises deployment. They hope to have the entire 9,000 square mile service area finished by 2024. More quickly, they'll have fiber to the home in Milford, Orderville, Glendale, Circleville, and Torrey this year. And then Hilldale and Colorado City, Minersville, Mount Carmel, Alton, Junction, Cousharam, and Teasdale in 2022. And so the companies are leveraging, like I said, the Reconnect funds, Community Connect funds, and then their access to the Utah Universal Service Fund allows them to deploy these networks in the most rural areas of the state. One of the other things that's always an issue when you're talking about broadband access is the access to the physical facilities that does a fiber pass by your home or your business, and we're working on that. But then also affordability plays into this, and you see that not only in the rural areas but also up here in the Salt Lake Valley. There's nobody can claim that they don't have access to fiber facilities if they're in this downtown or western area, but a lot of them don't adopt it because it's expensive. And one of the things that we've been working on with URTA is to try to figure out creative ways to make it more affordable for low-income families. We have this year been working with the Public Service Commission, the Division of Public Utilities, and the Office of Consumer Services to address affordability of broadband in rural Utah. And not to get into the weeds of rural rate regulation, but we have been constrained by some of the regulatory requirements in rural Utah. As you know, the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program was instituted by the FCC this year, and it's offered subscribers up to a $50 credit towards broadband. We're seeing a lot of adoption of that in rural Utah. It's been slower than we would have hoped, just because it's a little bit of a nightmare to wade through the bureaucracy and the application process and all of that. And also because I think consumers were concerned that it was a short time frame, right? So it's a lot of hoops to jump through for maybe 5 months of $50 credit. The FCC has extended that program, still not sure how long it will last. And so what our members have been doing is trying to figure out a way to keep people connected. If they sign up for the emergency broadband program, when that ends, when that funding dries up, how do we keep them connected? One of the things that we saw with the pandemic was, basically we went from, plowing along in your life at 100 miles an hour and to March of 2020, basically being told to stay home, and everything came to a halt. We had a lot of families in rural Utah that didn't have broadband connectivity, not because it wasn't available, but because they just couldn't afford it. They had to prioritize their funding elsewhere. This meant that their students were not going to be able to keep up. Their students were not going to be able to attend virtual classes. So what we had the good fortune with our small rural companies is we're very agile. And so the companies, basically before anybody really knew how long the quarantine period was going to last, our companies were reaching out to the schools in their areas and reaching out to the community leaders and saying, we will sign up families who have school-aged children for free broadband through the end of the year, because we don't want to see our students fall further behind. And so they were able to do that. They hooked up between 17 and 1,800, maybe even 1,900 families with free internet service to the end of the year, the end of the school year. And many of them have worked with their schools to continue the access for students who can't afford broadband. But we're looking for a longer term solution. And so what we've done is we've worked with the Division of Public Utilities and the Public Service Commission to figure out a way that we can offer a reduced cost standalone broadband service, much like you've seen some of the providers up on the Wasatch Front offer. I think Comcast has a broadband essentials program that assists low-income customers. Like I said, without getting into the nitty-gritty of rate regulation in Utah, the wholesale rates that we're required to charge kind of constrain the amount of discount that you can offer to companies. And so we've been working on a rule change with the Public Service Commission that would allow rural Utah, rural companies to reduce that wholesale rate and offer that discount to the low-income families that are already qualifying or are able to qualify for Lifeline service. This would be for broadband, standalone broadband service. We think that we anticipate that rulemaking to be completed in this year, the first quarter of next year, and we anticipate that it will reduce broadband, a standalone broadband product by at least $20 a month for each of those low-income families. So that allows, everybody knows it's more expensive to provide broadband in the rural areas of the state because you won't, where a mile of fiber might pass, 400 homes in Salt Lake City or Salt Lake County, you might pass 5 in rural Utah. So it, it's not going to be exactly the same cost as you would find in the urban areas, but it's going to be a big reduction. And so we're really happy and excited about that project. The broadband, the URTA companies are probably like everybody sitting in this room. We're hearing a lot about broadband funds becoming available, and we're doing whatever we can to take advantage of those funds. The USDA Reconnect program has been very beneficial, and we're excited about round 3, but I know we're going to hear about that next, so I won't steal that thunder. We're excited about some of the changes in round 3 with the increased speed. I think that's going to be a good thing for Utah. Broadband's defined as 25.3, but everybody in this room knows that sounds like dial-up, right? So our companies are embedded in the communities. Sometimes they're the largest community, they're the largest employer in their community. They work closely with, like I said, their schools, their community elected officials and whatnot to try and be agile and to try and work with these jurisdictions to get whatever federal funds are available, because the state funds are always limited. So let's try and do whatever we can. They're complicated processes, the grant applications. You can't decide to apply for a USDA grant on Thursday and have it done by Tuesday. There's a lot of engineering and a lot, it can be overwhelming. And so what our companies do is work with public-private partnerships, work with the communities to help them through that process. And I think that's one of the things that we offer is, a hometown feel and a hometown advantage in working with people that you already know. You're working with your neighbors and you're assisting your neighbors. And that's the kind of the update that I've got for rural Utah, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions that any of you might have.
the discounts that are in place for students. Is that something that could also be for stay-at-home workers, but they may be in a position where they can't necessarily afford to get the internet into the home, and they could get a job if they could have the internet in the home?
So the discount, that the free service that I spoke about right when COVID hit, that was just, they did that just for school families with school-age children. The discounts that I've talked about, the $20, that's based on income only. So anybody with reduced income could qualify for the Lifeline program and would be eligible for that kind of discount. Absolutely.
Did I hear you right that Emory got certification from Moab?
Yeah, to be a rated return carrier of last resort in Moab and then also in Grand County.
Does that mean Frontier was decertified?
They were not decertified. There will be 2 carriers of last resort in those areas right now. So we're working through.
Wonderful development.
So I'm curious, we were talking about the EBV program and the regulatory challenges with adoption, sort of slow take rate on those. We see the same thing at Comcast, where expected more people to do it. When you were talking about those regulatory challenges, are you referring to your members who are struggling to sort of meet the qualifications to be an EBV provider, or is it's really focused on the customer and you can't get the customers to say yes because of the or red tape hurdles that they have to jump?
Yeah, it's exclusively the second one. It's the customers that just get, well, and we also have, there's also a little bit of a stigma maybe in rural Utah, because in order to go in to apply for these programs, you have to tell your neighbor who runs the telephone company that you have low income. And so we do try and we have that to fight against also. But what we've done is, I mean, we've been very aggressive in putting together working papers for our members to help them through the process so that they can help the customers through the process. It's just been a lot slower. And some of the providers here could probably speak more personally on that, but that's the report that I'm getting. Yeah.
Areas around Washington and Iron County, did you say?
Let's see. You're challenging my geography now. We've got Minersville, Mount Carmel, Alton, Junction, Cusharam, and Teasdale. And we've also Milford, Orderville, Glendale, Circleville, Torrey. That's
What is it you're doing in Toberville?
Pardon me?
What are you doing in Toberville?
That's a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that. It wasn't in my list of places.
Because UDOT's gonna come down with a new freeway. Are you gonna
Well,
Jonesboro?
likely. I mean, I don't think UDOT does a project in the state, in the rural areas of the state without our members at least taking a look at it. So I would suspect that they would be involved in that project. And Tokerville, I think, is in South Central's area. So if it didn't get named on this list, it's slated to be done by the end of 2024.
Just to tag on to what we were talking about, we had an employee that had economic circumstances in Delta, and the Division of Workforce Services actually took on the deposit and everything else for the install of the service to the home, which hadn't had one before. So that might be something that could be known as an option, especially from the employment area.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And a lot of times it's just getting the word out, getting people to understand that this is a resource that's available to them. You know, asking for assistance is the first step for sure, but I'll pass that on.
Thank you very much. I think that's really exciting. There's such great broadband getting down in our rural areas. And so there's opportunities to move and live there and remote work. As I was listening to these announcements, you know, how the locations, I just thought, and this is almost as exciting as tuning into Saturday morning, general conference or something, to find out where the temples are going to be going. I'm sure all the construction companies tune into that session to find out where they're going to look for the next RFP. So, so that is exciting for folks all over, I think, and in the communities as well. I have a invited an internet service provider to come and present to us next. I work very closely with the rural telecoms and I love them. They are wonderful and they are true community partners. I appreciate that. And especially the information about the emergency broadband benefit, you know, that's been like, our numbers are really low in Utah. And I've attributed it to what? The Utah mentality, or I don't know, our Utah pride, or I don't know, or maybe it is just the red tape, but
I mean, I think those things kind of go hand in hand.
yeah.
You don't want to jump through the red tape because you already didn't want to. You already have. this
Don't
prideful
really want to
feeling.
do it anyway, so we can't fault people, but I think it will be ongoing, or something will be in place, whether it's the federal or state that might lead on. I'm not projecting anything, but you know, there's hope. There seems to be a huge amount of interest in broadband and a need for it, as we know. We also have internet service providers, and this is a sector that I'm learning more and more about. And so I thought maybe the rest of us would be interested here as well. I invited Jonathan Lee. He's the founder of .bar Communications. It's a fairly new company, and I'll let him give the background and tell us about the role of ISPs in rural Utah. You should also know that he's a county commissioner. So that's where I met him, was at one of the Association of Governments meetings.
Yeah, so when I go to meetings, if you ever hear about the kid commissioner, because I think the next youngest one's like 30 years older than me. But so sorry we were late. So we're both from Rich County. That's where we live. I grew up in Woodruff, now live in Randolph. Jordan here's from Lake Town.
Yeah, Lake Town. So that's Bear Lake area. For those of you that aren't aware of Rich County, everyone kind of knows where Bear Lake's at.
Has anybody here been to Bear Lake this year in this room?
I've been to the trough.
Crawford Trough,
Crawford
in Randolph. So
I'm talking about the restaurant.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, called the Crawford Trough.
Yeah.
So I helped them with their website as the only tech guy in the whole county. Yeah, so we started .bar about a year ago, and we actually worked with, I see Brooke here from Reconnect. He helped us get access to middle mile, and I would say, so after about a year, we're at a few hundred customers, and we started the company just as, you know, the area was sort of being underserved. We have a provider, and we get along with the local provider pretty well, but there hasn't been anything to spur them into action to give us a better connection. And so for the last 4 or 5 years, they have DSL, but they've also been servicing customers wirelessly, rather than upgrading their network. They've started upgrading this last summer since we put some market pressure on them. But yeah, so we're at a couple, and we were late because we're kind of the two only people that run the company, and two of our towers. If you were to go to Rich County right now, there's not a sunbeam out. I mean, we've had about a week and a half of no sun, and all of our towers are off grid. And so we've been charging the batteries. So at 6:30 this morning, we were about 7,000 feet up charging batteries. But one of the biggest challenges for, I think, local internet service providers obviously is access to affordable fiber. You know, when we were initially trying to start this up, we sort of shopped around, and some of the, I mean, right off the bat, it was $8,000, $9,000 a month for a 1 gig line and a 5-year commitment. So I mean, you're almost $600,000 commitment just as your initial barrier of entry. That doesn't include any sort of build out or anything like that, which is a huge problem. Because I mean, you get into urban areas, and obviously a 10 gig line is much less. But Telecom helped us out there and gave us access to some fiber, and we're able to throw up some towers. We have the goal, obviously, we're aggressive that we want to be less expensive, and right off the bat, we were 3 times as fast and about half the cost. And again, our competition is pushing their prices down. We've reached areas that they can't service, so we've really kind of complemented each other. But that was our main goal, is just to provide a better experience and give people a chance to hop back and forth. And really, we just wanted to help our community. wasn't sure if you had any goals or anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing is that, you know, the great thing about ISPs, especially ones like us that are smaller, is we have the local motivation to get in there and get good service to our neighbors. You know, we have the ability and the drive to want to do it. And so it's, you know, it becomes complicated for larger ISPs because they have a lot, you know, bigger region for them to cover. And these smaller communities aren't necessarily on a top priority list because, you know, as you were talking about, who was it? Just talking about before, you know, when you get into these small communities, there's only a few homes that are on so many streets. And so it's harder for bigger companies to really prioritize those areas when they've got much denser areas that they can cover. And so smaller ISPs like us, you know, we have the incentive to get in there and to provide, you know, service to a lot of these areas. And so that was our main goal. We lived in the community. We just weren't happy with the service we were getting because we needed better service. It just wasn't reaching us fast enough. And so we decided to just get into the industry and try to make a difference in our own community. So
yeah. And I would say another challenge for smaller ISPs like us is public funding. You know, you have companies that have people dedicated to grant writing and getting access to those monies, and it definitely has helped rural Utah. I mean, I live in Randolph and Woodruff have fiber all the way through them. I live out in the middle of nowhere and I have fiber to my house, and I'm sure all West used public money to get that there. But that public money also sometimes hurts the community because a lot of these companies will wait. You know, they have the ability to bring fiber, but why would they spend that money on 15 homes that are a mile apart when they could spend it on 500 homes that are in one development? And it makes sense. That's just how it is. So, you know, helping smaller ISPs get access to public funding, I think that's, you know, streamlining the process to apply for that kind of stuff. That would definitely help. Since we are smaller, it is easier for us to be agile. You know, we can try things out that typically would be a forklift upgrade for a bigger company. Jordan and I are the decision makers, so we can go out and buy new technology and put it on a home the next day and figure out what stuff works and what doesn't. Our ultimate goal, obviously, is we want to start putting some fiber into Lake Town, which is one of Utah's oldest towns. They still are either have DSL or wireless internet. So we're working on that. But yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed it. I think that we'll continue to see success. Hopefully one day either we you don't make enough money to go on a vacation, have enough time to go on a vacation, or make enough money to go on vacation, or you know, get purchased by one of these rural telecoms. That's sort of the ultimate goal when you start a business. So, but does anybody have any questions for us?
So I've got two questions that I'm picking you guys to, some of them are a little broader on the questions, but I think it's pretty valid in this process that we're working on. You guys bring up a pretty valid point that has happened quite a bit, where larger companies will receive funding, grants and other stuff to hit areas in rural markets. And typically is what we find is those, I've started taking the term cherry pick, but just because it's a lack of a better word, basically they cherry pick the areas to find what's gonna basically hit the most points on a grant. And once they hit that and they get the funding, then that's it. And so what ends up happening is when you have a small ISP, your example of backhaul fiber is perfect, because what happens is if that company then won't expand on their own cost, which is business sense, there's no one's arguing that, but they also then will limit others from utilizing that, you know, government funded project to then use their own services. So a small ISP that if they were in a different area might pay, you know, $1,000 for a gig backhaul, or 2,000, are paying $7,000 or $8,000 to use the service. One of the things that I think is critical that we can open and discuss is that there does have to be an open concept that when there's funding brought to the table, that our taxpayer funding there really does need to be conversation about mechanisms where if others are gonna expand from that, we need to have means where they can do that financially realistic for smaller companies to grab on. And it would really, if you want to really talk about what would help our rural areas, that would help immensely, because our cost, we're in Cache Valley, we're over the hill from you guys. The costs to tap a fiber line are 2 to 3 times than what I can tap it on the Wasatch Front just across the other mountain. So we're on the wrong side of the mountain. If you could argue the same thing, you're on the wrong side of the mountain to grab that. And then the other, and that's more of a statement / comment. Would you agree with that premise or scenario?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other one that I have, which is a little more complicated, is, okay, the maps, the broadband maps, are those passed down from the FCC to the state, and then the state uses those maps? Or are you collecting your own maps that we're going off of? Because this is big in rural areas on where, so when a company comes in, the reason I ask this is, take our area. I don't want to point fingers because I'm sitting across the table from a rep. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, I bet you're out of swing range.
That's right. I'm back a little bit. Okay, so a perfect example, and I looked at this in the Bear Lake area because I was curious if it was the same scenario. What's happened is the maps that we're using are projected service maps. And if you look at rural areas, that really messes things up because we've, in Cache Valley, we've collected over 300 addresses that are claimed in the map that are not serviceable by that map's demographic, but it kicks all of those people out of the grant possibility because they're in this artificial map. And the question that's asked on a smaller ISP, when I looked at Bear Lake, it was similar. Like they took these big chunks out of there, and I guarantee Dotbar could go in there and say, okay, this address right here, they won't hook up. This one they won't hook up. This one they don't. But it's claimed in the map, which means they can't, when they put the grant in, they can't include those addresses on there. Is there a reason that the state hasn't prioritized to an actual address algorithm for the mapping so that when a company says, when we say, are you servicing the area, there's actual addresses that say that's where it is. Because when we've done that in our own town, the map goes from solid red, which is served technically, to dots all over the place. Like it's got all throughout our small towns. And Bear Lake, I'm seeing a very similar trend where it says served in these core areas, but then there's gaps all over the place within.
Yeah.
Is that a question for you or for me?
He was looking at you. I guess I'm looking for, so would you agree that that is
I
a
want everybody
reasonable
to know
premise?
Yeah,
this
we've
looking
talked
right
about
at
it
me.
before, but, so I think we're done if you want to take that.
No, I thank you.
Because I don't have the answer.
Nathan Coda, are you on? He's our specialist over there, UGRC, Geospatial Referencing Center. So the answer to your first question, had a couple in there, I think.
Yes.
Is yes and yes. Okay, so we do collect directly from providers, local providers. I send out an email request. If you're not on that email request, give me your email and I'll make sure we're adding you to that so that we are getting your information of your areas. If we don't get a response from a provider, Nathan Coda or Zach Beck, who is with the UGRC, or will go to those FCC maps and capture what has been submitted there. Now, as far as the grant program, we will listen to Brad Clausen with USDA. And I know Kara's got something to say too. I think everybody's got a lot of things to say. That was a fireball presentation. I know that there's been a lot of talk at the state or the national level about these maps are not accurate. Okay, so they are very, very aware that these maps are not accurate. And there is an ability, well, I should say they're not very inaccurate. They are accurate, but they do cover census block areas. So there may be a home or few homes that are served in a census block, and then it's going to show that the whole block is served. So they're as accurate as census blocks are accurate. So to your next question is the state doing something to capture addresses? And that would be the ideal thing to do. Now, we are just now getting funding to this center, and it's being doled out carefully, okay? So we would like to add a layer to our maps, which would include capturing speed test data. Now, that can be subjective also. You know, we need to make sure that where this is being done, are they paying for the lowest service? Or are they paying for a full service? What kind of devices? How far from their, their router are they, and things like this? And so that would be a layer that we have to also look at subjectively. So, but we're hoping that if we can continue to add these layers, then they will start to tell the correct story, okay? I can't answer for Brad. I'm excited to hear about what he has to say from the USDA. I know that they've already had 2 rounds with this grant, and they've learned a lot. So I think he can probably answer a few of those questions. I actually reached out to him as I was working to build our state broadband grant. And I reached out to a couple of states. Some states are asking for addresses. That was highly recommended to me to ask for addresses. So that's what we're asking for, is actual addresses for this grant. And then I want to give all West a chance to say anything if you want to say anything about his comment. Kira, I'll let you go first because you've had your hand up.
Just real quick, I mean, I just wanted to address a couple of things. So it's not all of the money comes from the Utah Universal Service Fund. We have to get money from rates also. So it's not like the USF says, okay, well, sure, here's a whole boatload of money. We have to, they say, you have to pay some too, you have to collect some from rates. And so it's not preventative pricing, it's regulated pricing. Those are what the Public Service Commission and federal regulators tell us that we have to charge. And in exchange for that, we have the obligation to serve as a carrier of last resort. We have to provide phone service to everybody who asks for it. And so one of the other things that you run into is on the maps, I think I haven't seen the data requests lately, but I think historically it's been, okay, it's not who are you serving at this moment, but who could you serve within 2 weeks of asking for it, or whatever the time period is. And so we've got these rate of return regulated areas where we're a carrier of last resort. We have to provide service in that area. And that's what the maps, that's what we report on the for telephone service. And then as we deploy fiber to replace old telephone service, then the fiber facilities are available for networks for broadband internet access service. But I mean, to say that the pricing is higher in rural Utah because it costs a lot more to build services in rural Utah, and we're not getting all that money from the USF. We have to recover some of that from the ratepayers in the state. And so I just wanted to kind of clear that up a little bit.
That makes sense. And the question on the map is, so taking right now on doing the grant, so everybody pulls up the map and everyone knows, okay, because it's all based off of a point system. And so if everyone in here, if anyone is applying, is looking at that point system because that's how it gets tabulated and how it's going to work. So if you go off of what could be the case, that's part of the issue though, when you're trying to do a current as is now need grant, that map is broader than it really is actually the case. And who's the one determining that is actually or not? So if we provide physical addresses to this grant, which is what we're doing, which I think is a fantastic concept of saying, look, it can't be a premise of that area looks good. It has to be physical addresses. Are there any ways that it could be the case could be presented that some of those addresses that encroach in those areas that are covered by the map are indeed actually unserved or underserved areas, even though they're in there? Is that a possibility in this realm, or is it just too broad? It's not possible to even go there.
I believe it's possible. So having said that, this is the first time we've done this as a state, not first time we've done grant programs, but this is the first time in this broadband sector. Number one, we will have a challenge process. And so if there is an incumbent in the area who says, no, I'm already serving these addresses, there will be a challenge. We will also, we are here local, so we have the ability to get in a vehicle, and go out and investigate. And then as far as the maps, we're not going to rely on those wholly. They are a layer, okay? That is why I believe the legislature emphasized the importance of community engagement. You need to be working with the community. The local leaders know better than those at the state who or what is served, what it is like, and the needs of the community. So, and I think this has been kind of a stumbling block, I know, for a few that have been applying for the grant or want to apply for the grant is, and I'll just say this now because I was going to say it later anyway, so we're okay on time, is you need to meet not with one commissioner and shake a hand and go, we're good to go. They are, the community's on board. We've got a plan. And it's like, no, you need to meet before the local government. You need to make sure that there's a majority, that it's in the press, that there is information out there that this is happening. And what is an innovative project? You actually have to come up with an innovative long-term benefit to the community, and how is this helping them? That's going to take more than, as like Kira said, than thinking that you can go on and start applying Thursday and get it turned in Monday at midnight. Okay, that's the deadline, Monday at midnight. So, and those of you that are listening in, one of the first steps is to get a portal registration. If you haven't done that yet, go home and do that, or go back to your office and do that today. Because it can take 24 hours. It shouldn't take 24 hours. Our administrator checks those every morning, but I had 2 people last week email me and say, I submitted it a week ago and I haven't got it. And the one, I don't know what the glitch was, but if it happens over the weekend, the chances of it getting fixed are going to be really difficult if the deadline's Monday. And the other one, I think the person thought they had submitted it or clicked and hadn't. Okay, so again, if that happens over the weekend, it's going to be a challenge there. Does that answer your questions?
That's perfect. No, that's good
Okay.
information because it helps that you're trying to dive into it. There's just a lot of layers that it's going to take to try to get to a point where it can maybe be
A lot of
little bit
layers.
clearer.
There are. Oh, yes.
Thank you.
One thing I just want to tack on to that we've seen in our we're exploring areas for grant applications is addresses and serviceability is certainly an issue in terms of data. The other issue is speeds. A lot of times the claimed speeds of the products that are in a community aren't actually the delivered speeds. When you sit down with a city council member or somebody like that, they say, well, yeah, they say that they'll get you gig, but that's only on Tuesday between 7 and 8, not when it's raining, and those kinds of challenges. So it's just the other component of serviceability that I want to make sure you guys are.
So if you are looking to apply for the grant, use all the white space on your application and state all those things. And we can verify this, and this has been said, and this is how we are verifying it. So, all right, I would like to get off of the hot seat and turn it over. I think we've got Brad up next. Am I right?
I think so.
Okay. I was so excited that they made their announcement, USDA Reconnect Grant Phase 3. This one, for the rural areas, this is a great grant. We have some providers in the room that have applied for it. And I do want to say one more thing, because something was said, is that I know a lot of providers do go after these grants, but not all of them do. Many have made business cases without going after any federal dollars. And I think that's great too. So it's possible, it's doable. But of the funding, if this is the only way that some of these households would ever be connected, then we all paid into the pot. Let's get some of that back and put it into our state. So we'll turn the time over to you and tell me when you're ready for this presentation.
All right, thank you. So Brad Clausen, I'm the general field rep for USDA Rural Development, and we have several broadband programs, but today I'm specifically going to talk about Reconnect. I don't have a lot of time, so I'll probably talk fairly quick. I have quite a few slides, but we're going to go over a little bit what is the Reconnect program, and then more specifically this FOA, which is a funding opportunity announcement, really lays out what we're looking at for this round. So I think Rebecca had mentioned this was a pilot program before. We had 2 rounds. We had a regulation published now. So in the first 2 rounds, everything we talked about was in this FOA. So it was huge. So now we have a regulation, but the FOA just addresses more specific thing to this round of funding. So the pots, where the money is going, minimum speeds, that sort of thing. So I think I'm ready for the slide deck and we'll kick off.
Okay, can you see yours up there? Is that it? Oh, you're just seeing my face. How lovely.
I think you're on the right slide deck there. There we go.
All right.
So if you would go to the next slide there. So the first slide, we just talk a little bit about our summary. So for our first 2 rounds, we had 3 billion in applications and awarded about 1.5 billion. We really didn't need to get to the scoring as much. We think maybe this round there might actually be some scoring taking place. A lot of those applications that fell out were ineligible, so something wasn't done on the application. And this has been mentioned, is not something you're going to do in a couple of days. It's pretty intensive to get an application right. And if you don't get an application right, it's going to be ineligible and we won't even look at it. So that's probably the majority of those applications that didn't make it. It wasn't that we didn't have the funds, it means that they weren't eligible. So next slide. So what is the program introduction? Broadband program is federal loans, grants, and loan grant combinations to facilitate broadband deployment in rural areas. Funds can be used for the cost of construction, improvement, or acquisition of facilities and equipment needed to provide broadband service in eligible rural areas. And our mission is to expand the broadband service to rural areas without sufficient access to broadband, which is defined as 100 megabytes per second downstream and 20 megabytes per second upstream. And that's kind of the, the floor stomper for us now, is because in the first 2 rounds, that was 10/1. So, we've had pretty good success in Utah, but a lot of the providers were saying, hey, we're running out of areas where it's just 10/1. We've opened it up now to 100/20. So we expect a lot of areas that we would have considered to be ineligible prior are now going to be eligible. Next slide. So who can apply for the funding? States, local governments, or any agency, subdivision, instrumentality, or political subdivision thereof, a territory of possession in the U.S., an Indian tribe, nonprofits, for-profits, LLCs, limited liability partnerships, or a cooperative or mutual organization. So pretty diverse group that can apply. Next slide. And we're talking the funding types. So you can see we have 4 different funding types. So you can look at kind of the pots there, but we have 100% loan, a 50% loan, and a 50% grant combination, 100% grant, and then 100% grant for tribal governments and socially vulnerable communities. So you can see for the loan and for the 50-50, the max award is 50 million. And then for the last 2 categories, it goes for a max award of 25 million. For the 100% loan, it's a 2% interest rate. For the 50-50, of course, half of it's grant and half the loan would be based on the U.S. Treasury rate, interest rate, the time money is taken out. And then for the 100% grant, it's a 25% matching funds. And then for the last category, if you qualify, there's no matching fund requirement. The loan is first come, first served as we receive the applications. The rest of them are competitive, and that means that we probably won't look at them until the applications are all received. The pots, we've been told that money can move around a little bit. So, we say, hey, in the loans, it's 200 million. If there's only 100 million of applications and we run out of money in the grant, which, hey, most people want the free money, let's face it, we typically get more grants. We should be able to move the money around. And if you've been doing the math in your head, that should come up to like $1.15 billion is what we're looking at for this round. The build out speed needs to be 100 megabits per second symmetrical service. So that's kind of the 4 different funding types we're looking at. All right, next slide. Eligibility factors, previous fiscal year's unqualified comparative audited financial statements. We need a fully complete application, Can't stress that enough. It has to be a complete application. Don't run out of time and submit an application, say, oh, we forgot the last, so we didn't have time to do the last 2 things. It will be considered ineligible. You need to have a timely build out, which we say is within 5 years. We really hope that happens quicker. Most of our applicants want that done sooner. A concern that we've had is our environmentals have been taking too long to get done. We think that we have an answer on that, and we think that we're going to be able to clear those sooner. So we really do hope that that build out will happen much faster than the 5 years. The project needs to be financially feasible and sustainable. It needs to be technically feasible, and we need to have it fully funded. Next slide. So PFSA, so that's the proposed funding service area. So we talked a little bit about maps prior. We don't tell you where there's service. You have to tell us where there's service or where there needs to be service. So you can go on the map and you draw it. So we don't really help with that. We don't say this area is served or unserved. We'll say on our map, we'll have layers that say, hey, this is an urban area. This is not eligible. But as far as the service area, you draw that PFSA. And you can have numerous PFSAs. You can have 100 PFSAs. We would prefer that you don't, because it's kind of, but you can have as many proposed funding service areas as you would like. And the mapping tool is there. And for any of this, if you just Google RD Reconnect, this information will come up. And that's what I do. It's really quicker than for me going to a bookmark. But you can look at the map and we have all the different layers. And here are the eligibility layers we have on there. We have FAR level 4, non-rural areas, pending applications, protected broadband borrower service areas, and tribal lands. Next slide. Some more considerations. Applicants must submit evidence that sufficient access to broadband does not exist for at least 90% of the households in the PFSA. And that's identifying all existing providers in the PFSA and indicate what level of service is being provided. If a PFSA is found to have sufficient service, the applicant will be disqualified. And if the applicant is applying for a 100% loan, the applicant will be given the opportunity to remove the affected area. So if it is a loan and we find that one of you had 10 PFSAs and one's found to have service, we can ask you to remove it. On the other programs, we may or may not ask. We can also say, hey, you're ineligible. Facilities proposed to be constructed with award funds must be capable of delivering 100 megabytes per second symmetrical service to every premise. What's a premise? That's a home, that's a business, that's a farm. So every premise within that PFSA, so you draw the PFSA, every premise within there, you have to be able to deliver that 100 megabits symmetrical. And we will require all awardees who are receiving or under consideration to submit a statement certifying the funds requested are not duplicative of other funding and have not been and will not be something. So
sorry.
that's fine.
You think that screen would be
I
big enough?
probably have it here. I'll have to take my glasses, and will not be reimbursed by any other funding mechanism. So federal funds, so you can't duplicate federal funds. So if you have other federal funds in an area, you can't say, hey, if we get 2 different pots of federal funds, we're going to make money on it. Can't happen. All right, next slide. We will offer funding in areas receiving or under consideration for a Rural Digital Opportunity Fund RDOF award. However, the application should explain why Rush should provide additional funding. And this has been a big hot item for us. This vote took a long time to come out. We kept saying, hey, next week, next week, next week, next week. And I think this is some of the things that they were trying to kind of hammer out is, really, we get a lot of questions about RDOF. So if there's RDOF funding for an area, but it's not been built out, yes, you can apply. Russ will require all Reconnect awardees who are receiving or under consideration for RDOF funding to submit a statement certifying that the funds requested are not duplicative of RDOF funding and have not been or will not be reimbursed. So really, to me, what this is saying is if you take the RDOF funding, you can't take the money from us. So if you apply and get it built out with us, then obviously you can apply for RDOF as well. This vote came out on Monday, so there's still a lot of stuff that all of us are digesting. I'll kind of jump ahead. My last slide has some webinars and workshops. So in November, we have 4 different times. And if you're interested in this, it's going to be a little bit more detailed. So I would welcome anyone who's interested in this round to please sit through one of those. It really is a really smart people that kind of drafted all this. We'll be able to go through it and answer any questions. And the other thing is if you go to RD Reconnect and have a question, you can also type it in there. So you can say, hey, here's my question. And they'll either discuss it at one of these meetings or they'll have a list of kind of frequently asked questions for this round. So that really is where you can get the best information on this from the people that drafted this. All right, next slide. Eligible costs, they must be reasonable, allocable, and necessary. They can be used for construction, acquisition, or improvement of facilities, reasonable pre-application expenses not to exceed 5% of the total award, and for 100% loans to fund acquisition of an existing system that does not currently provide sufficient access to broadband. All right, next slide. Network requirements, you'll need to submit, a design, the diagram, needs to be, done by a PE and it needs to be technology neutral. Everybody have a copy of these slides. So if you really need more information, I'll let you dig in a little bit later. Next slide. Financial requirements, unqualified comparative audited financial statement for the previous year needs to be detailed, evidence of other funding necessary to support the project. We need a pro forma to include 4 years of historical data, 5 years of projections. Next slide. Know that it.
I don't think it is.
Oh,
It's not.
well, I can keep talking if I can. Give me 1 second to get to my back. Of course, I'll have to take my glasses off so I can see anything. So.
Stop sharing and go back in again.
So a subsidiary applying for Reconnect funding must submit financials on a standalone basis. An applicant can use consolidated audited financials of the parent as long as the parent fully guarantees the loan. And the financial pro forma should validate the sustainability of the project as well. So the scoring criteria, and it's a list. So like I said, in the first 2 rounds, we really didn't need to go to the scoring. Who knows on this round if we will. If there's enough, we talked about those pots, if there's enough applicants in those different pots, then it's going to come down to the scoring. So you can see here we have rurality, the proposed service area, level of existing service, economic need of community, affordability, labor standards, tribal land, local government, nonprofits, cooperatives, socially vulnerable communities, net neutrality, and wholesale broadband services. You can see there's a whole bunch of points there. And our program really is designed for rural areas. If it was easy to get fiber to a home, it would have been done. That's why, we're really looking at this as places that maybe it doesn't make sense to go to without some of these federal funds. So that's really what we're trying to incorporate here, is really to get more of these areas that can't be served or don't make economic sense to do that. All right, next slide. Next slide. So this is really talks about kind of the summary of the changes. So we talked about that 100/20. So we've already hit that. The build out speed 100 symmetrical. We talked about that. We just went over the scoring criteria. really, I don't have time to get into each one of those, but that's in that Pfsa, or when we have the workshops, I'd really encourage you to sit through there and learn more about those. And then a certification from the appropriate tribal official is required if services being proposed over or on tribal lands. Any applicant that fails to provide a certification to provide service on tribal lands will be not considered for funding. Next slide. Definitions, we talked about kind of an updated definition for local governments. For that remote area, that means area classified by the USDA Economic Research Service as frontier and remote area FAR level 4. And that was a new one to me. So I didn't know what a FAR level 4 is, but there you go. A geographic information system layer of FAR level 4 areas can be found, at our Reconnect site, and then it'll be on the map as well. So socially vulnerable community is a community or area identified in the Center for Disease Control Social Vulnerability Index with a score of 0.75 or higher. That's also a GIS layer. So that's the nice thing is if you go to our map, all of these layers will be on there. So you'll be able to kind of click and play and say, okay, what does our PFSA need to look at? Well, you can, if you're eligible for these layers, you can kind of play around and see if it makes sense, and you can get some points for that. Sufficient access to broadband, any rural area in which households have access to fixed broadband service, at least 100 over 20. All right, next slide. And system requirements, facilities must be 100 symmetrical. We talked about that. Tribal government means the governing body of an Indian or Alaska Native tribe, band, nation, pueblo, village, or community listed pursuant to the federally recognized Indian Tribal List Act. And then tribal land, any area identified by the United States Census Bureau as tribal land. That's also going to be a layer on our map. All right, next slide. And next steps, next slide. Okay, so when I talked about some of our delays, and that's with our environmental, we don't want anyone, if you're interested in this, do not initiate section 106 without communicating with us. So once 106 is started, it has to be completed. That has slowed down a lot of our projects. So we know that some of our projects do not need to have 106 done. But if it's initiated, it has to be completed. So we're in the past, we said, hey, initiate 106. It's going to save time. It hasn't saved time. So please, if you're looking at it, do not initiate 106 unless you talk to us and you get an award, and then we can look at the project and then we can say, yes, please do, or don't. All right, next slide. Online applications, they're done online. There's the link for that. System registration requirements, you need to have the e-auth, which you can do online, an authorized representative request. You'll also need to have a taxpayer identification number, a DUNS number, a current SAM Gov registration. And I'll tell you right there, that kills a lot of applicants or has in the past. So, you got to have a SAM registration. Make sure that that's current. Don't say, hey, it's going to run out in 2 months and the application's due in 4 months and you forget about it. You submit your application. We go and look the first thing and say, hey, they don't have a current SAM registration. So that's just it. It's really bad when we look at that and have to kind of consider you ineligible before we even start reviewing that application. And the CAGE code goes along with that. Next slide. Technical assistance. So I put on here the webinar date. So November 9th and the 16th talks about a regulation webinar. There's the times, the FOA webinar. So you can see we kind of have a regulation webinar the next day of FOA, and then we skip a week and we do the same thing. There's the link where you can register for the workshop webinar. Subscribe to receive updates about upcoming events on the Reconnect website. If you're interested in any of our programs and you haven't signed up for Gov Delivery, I would encourage you to. I don't get to see the FOA until you guys do. When we deliver anything, it comes through our Gov Delivery. Everyone sees it at the same time. They don't have like a Gov Delivery for government employees and one for everyone else. It's the same link. You sign up, you get updates, so you can go in there and say, hey, I want to be updated on housing, telecom, rural business, whatever. And then when the update is pushed out, everybody gets access to that. So if you haven't signed up for GovDelivery and are interested in government programs, I really encourage you to do that. The application submission. So we're giving you about a month to think about this. So we're saying, hey, you can start submitting on November 24th and the deadline's February 22nd. Our last round to Community Connect, we made it December 23rd, and needless to say, there was a whole bunch of people weren't happy with this. So we were told specifically, please don't make this over Christmas, and it's not. So you can see the resources, our website, really good information there. I think we do a good job with that. There's a link to the Pfsa, the link to the regulation, which I said is kind of new this year as well. So some new stuff there. And if you have questions, you can go to that site, type them in, they'll be responded, or they'll address those in the regulation webinar or the Pfsa webinar. And next slide. I think that was it. So I know I went over a lot of information fairly quick. So this is hopefully just kind of a teaser. A little bit about what the program is, kind of some updates for the Pfsa. And really the main thing is, like I said, is we really kind of kicked up that minimum speed. So we're hoping that a lot more areas are going to be eligible. We've had fairly good success in Utah, 10 awards on Reconnect. 6 of those are within the state. 4 of them are with awardees that are headquartered in the state, but the projects are in surrounding states. But like I said, we've had pretty good success in Utah. Encourage you to keep it up. Like to see the money stay local. So I cover Colorado and Utah. If it stays here, that's great for us. So I think that was all I had, unless someone had questions.
Question.
You talked about combining funds, and it's a no-no to do it, but if I have a grant that's for temporary housing, but I also need to be able to tie into something like that, is that combining funds?
Federal funds, temporary housing, or what do you mean by temporary housing?
It could be state, it could be, it's an area where there's going to be a planned development that's going in the area, but they're going to do some temporary housing because they have a need for employing 500 people before the actual development goes into the area.
So if there's any federal funds, we can't duplicate that. So if it's other funds, and I guess when you look at it, then you'd have to be kind of like a grant program, right, for the 25%. So if you were looking at something like that and saying, hey, we're applying, but some of those 25%, if it's not federal funds, we could look at those funds kind of to be matching on that. But for specifics, if there is something, shoot that over to me and ask me, and we can kind of look at that. So since this is a competitive program, I can't look at your application and say, hey, here's what I would do different. But what I can do is, if you have general type of questions and say, hey, we're a town and we think we're going to partner with a provider and we maybe want to provide an application, we can answer those sort of questions and maybe guide you and say, okay, here's some things to look at, or a scenario, you can shoot that over. I'd be more than happy to look at it on that. I just can't say, a week before the deadline, I'll look at your application and see, if there's anything I see. Except, like I said, have someone really detail oriented at the end, look at it, really make sure. We've had applicants who take it on themselves to fill it out, and they've been awarded. Most of our applicants or awardees actually have consultants kind of help do that. But, I think a lot of them are fairly successful with that. But really need someone detail oriented to make sure that all those boxes are checked. Anything else?
Are there any? Okay. I guess there's a couple of questions in chat. Alicia, do you want to share those with us?
Yes, we'll do. First question, if providers are receiving FCC high cost loop, can they qualify for Reconnect funds?
FCC what?
FCC high cost loop.
So I am not an engineer, nor am I a telecom person who has 50 years of background. I honestly don't even know what that is. Anyone in the room have any?
Good question.
So that's a question I cannot answer. That's probably a great question to address, and the Reconnect, our site you know, if you want to type that in and have them answer it back in DC, that's where all those questions are. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
No worries. Okay, the next question is, are ACAM locations for 25/3 or less eligible for this program?
BCM.
ACAM, the
Oh,
alternate cost America, or cost. Connect America.
so if an area has service under 25/3 and it's on our map and it's an eligible area, yes, it would be eligible.
Awesome, thank you.
Is that all the questions?
That is.
Thing applies to the high cost loop support as well.
Okay.
So the high cost loop support is just the federal universal service support for deploying high cost or loop, the fiber loop in high cost areas.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's another, that's another.
So if
federal-
they've already deployed broadband service that makes it ineligible, then they're not eligible. But if they have not, and those funds are not being used for that, then they are eligible.
And one of the things that if you look in the phone, will probably be addressed a little bit more in our webinars, is even if in the past, if we had a borrower who was still in repayment, they were done with construction, but they're in repayment and they had a loan from us from 15 years ago, but they're not providing the service of 100/20, they can be overbilled now. So it's something in the past that was a protected borrower, we wouldn't do that. Now is if you don't have the minimum speed, and we're saying, hey, our definition of broadband is 100/20, if someone had a loan from us 15 years ago to put, you know, whatever they put in the ground. Now, if we say, hey, that's not 100/20, someone else can go there, or that awardee or that previous borrower can go back there and reapply for those funds for that area. So that's something else that's kind of new as well.
Okay.
So, all right, well, hey, thanks.
Move on. We've got at least one more presentation. Liz Gavitis, comes to us from the Utah State Library Division. She's a digital access and education program manager. And even though I have my name there on, I've asked her to just take care of the whole presentation.
Okay, so I'll try to go pretty quick because I know this isn't what you want to actually hear about today. Well, I can start by saying what I want to share with you is why digital access, this larger picture, is an ecosystem. It's not individual actions, it's not individual groups, it's a larger thing that we need to build together.
Well, I had it here and now I'm not finding it. So.
Well, I'll go ahead and start.
Do
Okay,
that.
so I want to share with you a story that I heard from a Utah librarian. She told me about a person in her community who lived in a mobile home park, and she didn't have internet at home. She was a mom. Her kids lived in the trailer with her, and she wanted internet. So she asked around. She said, how can I go ahead and get home internet? And the answer she got was, sorry, you can't. There's no wiring. That was her answer. And she didn't have the digital literacy skills to know that that wasn't a good enough answer, that she should push back on that. And so as far as she knew, that was the end of the question. She didn't get home internet, too bad. Her kids couldn't do schoolwork. She couldn't do her doctor's visits. And unfortunately, oh, awesome. Do you want to move, I think, 2 slides in?
Yeah, if I could, but it's frozen again.
Oh.
Just keep going and I'll get there.
Okay.
again.
Okay, well, this isn't too unique, unfortunately. There's a little bit of a gap between the literacy skills that she has and the situation that she's in. So the most frustrating part of this story is that this entire complex was actually wired with fiber. She could have had home internet and she just had no idea. She didn't know who to ask. That is not too unusual either. She's one of, 343,358 estimated Utahns who have broadband access at home and don't have a home internet subscription. That's a huge number. If we stop talking about digital access, once the fiber is in the ground, we are missing a huge, huge piece of this problem. So these folks, that make up this giant statistic, they need this ecosystem of support, right? They need to find the right answers no matter where they go, no matter who they start asking. And fortunately, this mom was actually in kind of a best case scenario. How are we doing? That's okay. That's
I'm
okay.
going back to your email.
That's all right. Yeah, kind of a best case scenario. She actually did have this ecosystem of support. So she was able to go to her local library and ask for help. And our libraries are starting to offer things like dedicated tech mentors. Joe, just like an hour ago, I heard him say caseworkers, we need caseworkers. That's what librarians are starting to serve as far as digital literacy. So these tech mentors are building relationships. They're helping people figure out exactly where the gap is. So it's not just this big unknown that you're not connected to, right? In this case, this tech mentor was able to help her find devices for her kids, find job upskilling, understand how to connect through Zoom with her doctor. And once they started talking about this internet problem, oh, awesome. Go 2 slides further. Okay. Once they started talking about what was going on here, why she didn't have home internet, they realized this is a simple problem. It took 2 phone calls to the provider and she had home internet. That was so simple, so straightforward. And go to the next slide, please. Libraries are doing this all over our state. I mean, obviously they're providing tech mentors, but they're also doing things like open help labs and classes. And I think one of the most important things is just being a space where people can go and ask questions and, you know, not feel ashamed about not knowing things. Actually, let me share with you one patron's own words, because I just love this quote so much. He said, "I watched a movie out of our church library. I cleared all my emails. I opened a book from Stephen King. I have done other things, but it feels like, where else can I go today? I'm going to make a list of all the things I can do. You will be surprised. I went from being trapped to exploring. My quality of life is so much better. I smile." I think that's such an awesome quote. Now, what that quote doesn't tell you, I'm gonna grab my water bottle. What that doesn't tell you is that this guy was actually a dialysis patient. He had very low digital literacy skills. And he was an English language learner. These are the types of people that have all these intersecting vulnerabilities that the libraries are able to reach with these programs. Will you go to the next slide? So it's not just these really basic skills that libraries are trying to teach for this ecosystem of support we're building. We're also looking towards the future. Now, all of you know, there's a big gap between the skills that kids graduate with and the skills that today's employers need in the workforce. So that's something the libraries are trying to answer as well. We're trying to build the computational thinkers that we're going to need in 5 years, in 10 and 20 years, because we recognize that libraries are driving digital equity, and digital equity is our future, our shared future. Let's go to the next slide. So we can't do all of this lifting ourselves. Libraries have hit the absolute limit on institutional capacity, and it's just not going to be sustainable for one, organization to be responsible for this. It needs to be this this holistic team effort, right? And I think that you're all feeling exactly that same pinch on capacity. We're all struggling with this. But I think the answer here is collaboration. If we're sitting in rooms like this when we're talking about the gaps, then we're also coming up with the solutions in rooms like this. And instead of each of us working in silos to come up with little solutions, we can be sharing resources, which helps us to, be more fiscally responsible, to be more effective with our time, and eventually to get to these outcomes that we want a lot faster. So Becca asked me to talk about a couple of opportunities for building this capacity together. Starting off is the Capital Projects Fund. Is this familiar to you all? Okay, cool. So if you've been following the Treasury's guidance, you know exactly as much as I do. I'm going to say that right off the bat. I don't have any special information about what's going to happen in Utah. I won't get into specifics of what's eligible in these areas because, again, you can get that from the Treasury, and I don't have any more information than that. But what I can say is I'm really excited about this because this piece here, these community projects, this opportunity to expand how we're offering these services, how we're reaching our communities, I think this is our opportunity to build capacity in a larger scale. When I talk about needing an ecosystem of support, that is what this ecosystem looks like. And to my knowledge, this is the first time we're seeing funding that looks just like what we're trying to build instead of targeting, one specific need. So I don't know what the end result is going to look like for Utah. Obviously, this group is going to be engaged in this, but the best tool that we have for directing these funds, for deciding how we're going to build this ecosystem is with our plan. So you've heard about this before. The Broadband Center is directed to create a state digital connectivity plan. Now, we already have a broadband plan. That is thanks to this group. The infrastructure bill, which has not yet passed, but we'll see, it requires a state digital equity plan as well. So Rebecca and I have been kind of talking about what this might look like, how these three different things fit together. This is the model that we've come up with. The broadband plan is one component, the digital equity plan is another component, and ideally they come together to create our digital connectivity plan. Next slide. So this is our timeline. It's so rough and so open to feedback and changes. You can see we're hoping to get a draft to you, you're our stakeholders, by the end of this year so that we can get some feedback from you. Hopefully in our January meeting, we can get a little bit more direction and guidance from this group because we really want it to be responsive to your needs and to the environment that we're trying to build, working together this larger environment. There is a lot of input planned from all of our stakeholders, from the public, from anyone who might be interested in the results of this plan. Next slide. So I do want to get some feedback right off the bat. Is there anything that you all want us to know in this very early stage? Anything you want us to consider as we're looking at this plan?
Are there plans to build more libraries? I live in a part of the Salt Lake Valley that just has no, I think the nearest library is, I don't even know where the nearest library is, I mean, so are there extra facilities that can be built, like maybe smaller?
I don't personally have like a plan to build libraries. I wish I did. I wish I had that power. So what I can say is that actually our libraries, despite 0 state dollars over the past 5 years, our libraries are absolutely the foundation of digital equity and the place where people are going to find support, to access the information age. And actually our library buildings in our state have an average age of 50 years. That's including remodeling. So if a building is remodeled, we start that over again at 0. Yeah.
Some of the structures that are with the RCIC, the innovation centers, is there any thought process within the state digital equity plan, like the Atwood location in St. George, some of the things they're doing in Vernal and that type of thing? It's not a library per se, but it offers some of the similar features. Is there a parallel there?
I think so. I think that's exactly what we should be looking at when we're talking about the capital projects fund, right? These facilities, yes, libraries are specifically included, but health facilities are also included, and any sort of multi-purpose community centers where people, so the language in the bill is very specific. It requires direct, what's the phrasing? Hang on, I didn't want to do any interpreting, so I actually printed off my notes. Directly and specifically enable work, education, and health monitoring. And the language is "and" all throughout that bill. So I think that when we're looking at those like innovation centers, there's a digital opportunity center that's being built right now, things like this, as long as we're meeting all 3 of those needs, I think those are exactly the facilities that we want to see. Yeah.
Is there anything being taken a look at for the requirement from a lot of municipalities for a certificate of public necessity and convenience to operate in easements and right of ways? There's very specific language that pertains to telephone operation, and there's a lot of ISPs that operate as ISP only that are kind of pushed off to the sides to be able to operate in that space because there's some that just don't operate with telephone services.
I have a thought, but maybe someone else is better positioned to answer that. Do you want to answer?
No, unless there's language in there.
No.
And I haven't seen that.
Okay, you're talking in context of the plan, right?
Yeah, just talking about the plan as a whole for participation.
So my thought is that this is our opportunity to direct how policy and state code evolves over time. We don't actually get to rewrite the policy, the code ourselves in this plan, but that's the opportunity to say, here's a gap, here's a problem, here's barriers we're creating based on the regulations in place right now, and we can give some guidance for how that should change in the future. And then this can be a good tool to move, legislative bodies in the direction that we need. Does that kind of?
Yeah, right.
Yes.
You mentioned the aspect of healthcare. I just wanted to state that there are a number of projects going on in other states around us, utilizing space in libraries to do telehealth visits, put in kiosks where people can come in, have a private space to do a telehealth visit. Just want to make sure that because there's this big health equity, divide, and the broadband divide adds to that health equity. So that could be included as part of the plan.
Yeah, I've been really excited to see those projects. I talked about these tech mentors. We're also seeing health mentors that offer those same kinds of hands-on help. How can you sign up for insurance? How can you find a provider that's going to help you? And I would love to see that expanding into libraries and into these other facilities that we're talking about. Joe.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about folks who have kind of instrumental barriers to broadband adoption and how we need to help them overcome those. They know they want it, but they don't know how to get it. I'm curious if the plan is planning on emphasizing with what we've seen, at least with Internet Essentials adoptions. There's also a lot of folks who don't know they want it. They think, well, I've got my cell phone and I can check my email, so I'm fine. They don't realize the sort of full scale of benefits from a genuine wireline or fixed wireless connection.
Yeah, if I'm remembering right, there's about 250,000 Utahns that have a cell phone as their only access to the internet. And I think that that's something we can address with digital literacy. When we build that awareness of what kind of economic opportunities are available to you online, we're also going to build an understanding of the value of a home internet subscription. And those are things that, again, when I talk about this ecosystem, that have to happen in collaboration. You all are the experts here when you can provide great tools to, K-12 schools, so that these kids are coming home and saying, Mom, look at this awesome thing that I did online today. We can slowly build that awareness of what opportunities are available and help people see the value in their subscription. Anything else on the plan? Okay, I've gone over time.
Done now, all the slides? No. Okay. Well, I appreciate it. Now you know why I asked her to present. She does much better than I do. I would just like to take some time right now. I just had some slides just to at high level again about the broadband access grant. And this is, a part of it, what we're doing here with this digital connectivity. There are parts of that within the grant as far as, making it affordable and getting it to areas that it wouldn't be otherwise served without the funding. I'm going to open this up to anybody online as well, but if we have, what I'd also like to say is thank you for coming. We are at the top of the hour, so I recognize some people need to leave. We have a networking lunch, and I heard them bringing the food in. We have, not for us, but we have a special guest coming here right after our meeting, and his initials are SC, and his prefix is governor. And so we've been told to eat and clear out. But that's not to push us out. We have plenty of time. We've got a window of like at least 30 minutes or so to get your food, and don't eat it fast, okay? So if you would like to go and get some food at this time quietly, if I have some questions though that I could answer, maybe regarding the grant, and anyone online, if it's anything with that, Alicia, chime in. And I do want to say one more thing about what I had said earlier about engaging the community. That I used to work for the county, and I know what an emergency meeting is, and they're doable. And today's only Wednesday. So if you need to do one, you've got Thursday and Friday, and you can do them virtually too. So that is an important component of that grant. That's what I wanted to say. Any questions?
There's a question on the screen.
Will there be another state broadband grant opportunity in 2022? I don't know. We hope so. So, I've reached out to GOPB, that's the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget. It's your legislators that are going to decide this. So if you know who your local legislator is, I would talk to them and say, we want to see this happen. This capital projects is broadband specific. So there's a lot of funding there. It can go towards fiber backbone to UDOT. I know that they could probably take that whole fell swoop and send it over there. And if that's beneficial, most beneficial to the providers and get into the local communities, let us know. We'll pass that on. If you want to see a grant, again, let us know, let your legislators know. If you want to see it go towards affordability and maybe, making sure that this is funded, or digital access, you want it to go to Uetn and get devices through the libraries, make it accessible that way to the schools, and making sure that everybody that can access it is going to sign up, because now they've got the way to do it. Let us know, let your legislators know.
One more question in the chat.
Okay.
Says, if you do get more funding, will you open up the portal again or use the projects from this first round?
That's a really good question too. So historically, what Go Utah has done in the past is to allow those that have already applied, to look at those again. If there's some things that need to be fixed on those applications, then they probably have the opportunity to go back and correct. But then it would open again. And there's no guarantee. It's not like it's a first come, first serve. It's based on meeting those statutory requirements we have as far as unserved, underserved, community engagement, higher speeds, and greatest investment for the state.
Super simple question. Whoever is representing Centricom that's here, I'd like to talk to them because I haven't met the reps. So if we have Centricom reps, that was the
Okay. And if not, I can let you know who that is. That's the nice thing about coming here in person. So I appreciate those of you that were able to attend. Feel free to get your lunch. Also, stop at the desk. It will be more than 2 hours. We can validate. So if anybody's hesitant coming here because they know they've got to pay for parking, you don't. So stop at the front desk and get it. Your parking pass is validated. Anything else? Okay, great. Thank you again, John. And I did get to say thank you. I appreciate everything you're doing in your little rural communities. It's awesome. We need everybody and everyone. Getting everyone connected. So thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks for sticking around.
Yeah.